This week's show brought to you by my exclusive raid pass. I actually got one. Welcome back to another Boxscore Geeks show. The stars have aligned, and much like Disney and Lucasfilms, we too have a sequel that I think will shatter international records. We are going to do a review of The Last Jedi, which I know is a little out of line with our normal basketball stuff, but I think, Brian, how many tangents did we have last week? So it's a logical progression of that. So anyway, back with us for the sequel. For those of you who don't know, we did this once before for The Force Awakens. We have our esteemed Tiptree Award-winning, amazing sci-fi author of The New Mother, E.J. Fischer. You can find on Twitter at I think you've been smarter on social media in the new age, right, E.J.?
I've been taking a social media break, but hi, I'm EJ. I'm still technically at Glorious Hubris on Twitter, but, you know, who knows if I'll see if you tweet at me anymore. I took it all off my phone, I logged out on my browsers, and I'm happier. I really am. I recommend it. And
not Glorious Hubris, I believe Eugene Fischer, spelled with a C, so Fischer is your website if people want to check him out. I have the limited special edition of Asimov's fiction, which, as I mentioned, EJ is a Tiptree Award winner, and he puts a special, if you get him to sign in person, he had some of those. So there's that. No one better that we could expect to have for a Star Wars show. And then, of course, back with us, as always, co-host Patrick Minton, NBA Geek on Twitter. Patrick.
Hey, hi, everybody. I have no special science fiction credentials whatsoever, other than probably that I've seen more of it than most people alive.
And then
it is a little underground. Like, you've got to really want it to see Star Wars.
No, not Star Wars. Just science fiction in general. Like, I've seen a bunch of weird shit that most people probably haven't heard of. A lot of it virtue of the fact that I'm, like, old. So.
Have you seen, there's an amazing movie with Mark Hamill where he's like a time cop? Have you ever seen that?
No, I haven't. Is
that the one where he sticks someone in the balls and then says, "Never mess with a Jedi Master"?
Oh, no, that's James. Bob Strike Back. But no, I'll try and look it up in the background as I keep talking. But yeah, there was. I've mentioned this kind of weirdness before, but in the age of being able to access all media ever easily, meaning like you never need to watch something bad. I remember the days of cable television and being up at 4 a.m. on some random sci-fi channel and recognizing Mark Hamill in some bad, sci-fi knockoff movie that looks worse than Star Wars, despite the fact that I think it was in like 1980.
Yeah, I mean, like the late 80s and early 90s were dark days. That was like after the studios had given up trying to imitate Star Wars because, all of their attempts to do so sucked, and decided that, I guess science fiction just isn't very profitable, because that's generally how Hollywood executives think. They make a terrible movie in a certain genre and it doesn't make any money, so they decide the genre is shit. There just wasn't any like science fiction. There weren't superhero movies. It's like it was pretty much a bit of it was dark days if you were a big science fiction.
Unless your name was James Cameron, in which case, you were cleaning up.
Yeah.
And by the way, Brian, I put it on the very bottom of the script, so if you do want to open it up, it's got an amazing cover box or whatever, but it was called Time Runner. It's from 1993. I got to give this out. During the unstoppable alien invasion of 2022, so we're due soon, one man flees through a wormhole to 1992 in hopes of changing the future. But attempt after attempt is made by someone there to catch and kill him. 4.2 stars on IMDb. So there's Mark Hamill. And then we are produced by our voice of God, Brian Foster. I'm just going to do one nickname this week because Brian said he's pretty much going to stay out of it. I'm not even going to let you introduce yourself, Brian, but if you pop in, then I'll give you the full introduction. So let's get going on Last Jedi. What I'm going to do, I'm just going to kind of steal from one of my other favorite podcasts. I just completely spaced the name, so that shows you how much I love it. That Thing You Like, they've been guests on this show before. They just do a good plus to shit minus. We can do whatever we want, but I'll say, EJ, what did you think of this movie? You can use a good plus to shit minus scale, or you can just say didn't like it, whatever you want to go with.
I'm not sure that I'm sufficiently educated to have yet full understanding of the good plus to shit minus scale, but what I will say is that this... I quite liked it in that this was the first Star Wars movie I've ever personally seen in a movie theater that seemed to make a persuasive argument for there to be a reason to make more Star Wars movies.
Interesting.
Wow.
Oh, yeah.
How old are you again?
I'm 34.
So you didn't see Empire Strikes Back in the theaters, I'm guessing.
No. No, I saw them all on VHS as a kid.
Yeah.
But the first ones I saw in the theater were the prequels.
Did you go to the re-releases? Because I've seen all of the movies in the theaters, but then of course I saw the annoying George Lucas just had to go back and use Photoshop to touch up some scenes inexplicably.
Yeah,
I got to see those in the theaters.
How old are you, Dragon?
35, so I'm 1 year old.
So both of you, if you did see the originals in the theaters, it was only the touched up, bastardized versions, right? Because
I had the VHS of the original releases with the Vaseline under the speeder on Tatooine and all of that, the pre-CGI, and I grew up watching those and wearing those out.
Well, I'm old enough to remember actually waiting in line to get tickets to see Empire Strikes Back. So,
I missed the first wave of it being a cultural event, and then when it was a cultural event again during my lifetime, it was sort of an adulterated and disappointing one. And so, I think I wrote something around the time The Force Awakens came out. Like, all The Force Awakens needed to do to make $1 billion or so was to give people uncomplicatedly positive feelings about Star Wars again, which it did by being perfectly unoriginal.
Mm-hmm.
I love the way you described it, which again, I'll include in the show notes the link for the last one we did on this. But you called it a palate cleanser, which is true. You basically just said, we're just gonna, we're gonna.
That's a pretty good way of putting it.
Yeah, we're gonna let you forget everything about the prequels and go.
Yeah, feel excited the way you used to again. And then we have the chance to do something interesting. And so the real question, after, The Force Awakens, which was like, it was a remix album by inferior talent, but with way better equipment. It's like, what's the sophomore attempt to be? Like, now that you've wiped the slate clean, like, what are you going to do? Are you going to keep trying to tell the same story over and over again? Or are you going to try to do something new? And what I loved about The Last Jedi was it was a completely unambiguous announcement that they're going to try to do something new.
Okay, and I'll let Patrick, your thought. And so, by the way, I didn't explain it because I'm just ripping off somebody else's scale. They just have two parts: good, it's a good movie, or a shit movie, and then they've got a plus or minus, and then so they can say it's a shit movie, but the plus. I shouldn't have tried to steal somebody else's scale. Lesson learned. But just what did you think of the movie?
Oh, I'm familiar with the scale. I love that podcast too. I would give this a good minus.
Pretty good price.
Is that good praise? I feel like it seems like on the internet, the ratings tend to be either good pluses or shit minuses, depending on who you talk to on the internet, right? It's like nobody seems to have a middle of the road view. Also, there has been a lack. So there haven't been very many people who have given positive reviews while pointing out a few flaws, and there haven't been very many people who've given negative reviews while pointing out some good things about the movie. It seems to be everyone's just completely emotional about it, and it's either amazing or terrible. I thought it was a good minus movie. I thought it was I agree with EJ. Is like they took it in a direction that was unexpected and refreshing. The cynic in me also says, though, that like from a business standpoint, if you believe that Disney is going to make Star Wars movies for the rest of our lives, which they probably are, it's exactly the kind of thing they needed to do, because let's be honest, even with Star Wars, if they kept rehashing the original trilogy forever, in about 5 or 6 more years, we would all lose interest.
Yeah. You don't pay $4 billion for something to functionally re-release it again and again and again. You have to do something new with it.
Yeah. And they did it in a smart way, because I think Lucas was trying to do that with his prequels too, but Lucas was like that cranky old guy who plays in the band you loved when you were a kid, and you go to see him 20 years later and he refuses to play any of the old hits, right? Whereas I feel like Disney's doing a pretty good job of getting their new talent, their new directors to go in original directions, while still also saying, but you got to make it Star Wars. You got to call back to the hits, right? You got to put some things that, like, you can't do it without that Star Wars feeling of delight and nostalgia so one of there were a lot of things that Abrams said about the trilogies, and like that they brainstormed about what makes Star Wars, and like some of the ideas I thought were pretty interesting. Like how, for example, all the technology everywhere is pretty much junk, even though they do amazing things. The technology is all junk. And it still kind of keeps that kind of feeling around. Whereas the prequels were just abandoned all the things that made the originals the originals.
Well, I mean, I think just more simply, under the aegis of the mouse, there is an enforced tonal consistency that the original trilogy had because they were inventing things for the first time, and it wasn't like a cultural institution yet.
Right.
But that able to write a completely blank check, the prequels had no tonal consistency.
Yeah, and that's the kind of thing that, for better or worse, Disney is amazing at. You see it in all the Marvel movies, right? The Marvel movies follow all formulas, right? Every single Marvel movie pretty much follows a formula, which doesn't always mean it's a terrible movie. Sometimes formulaic movies are pretty good movies, and at least very entertaining movies, right?
There's a reason that procedural television shows make all the money for them to produce every other television show.
Yeah.
There is a comfort in formula.
Yeah.
So I want to talk, actually, I liked your point there, Patrick, about some good, some bad, because what breaks down for me, and I had a conversation with a friend about this, is we can break down a few plots, and this is by the way standard Star Wars. The standard Star Wars formula is everybody starts together, at least in like the second and third movies. They break off for some reason. We follow the subsequent side plots. They come together, and like in the extended universe, that was the book formula too.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, this one, the basic one is, Rey is meeting up with Luke Skywalker to get training, a la, Yoda in Empire Strikes Back. Finn and Poe, this is the plot line that I just cannot stand for the life of me. Mm-hmm. The Resistance with Leia, Finn, and Poe is running from the Empire and that they have to mutiny to try and find someone to break them onto a ship to hack something, maybe.
Crucially, they don't have to mutiny. They choose to mutiny.
Yeah, well, it's that entire plot, but that's plot number, 2. And then we kind of have plot number 3, it overlaps with Rey in a very interesting way, which is Kylo Ren, the Darth Vader-ish character, is we believe he is questioning his motivations with his Emperor-ish character, Lord Snoke. I get it wrong? Snoke. Apologies for not remembering his name. Great, because he only shows up a few times. But possibly questioning it. He's interacting with Rey. We kind of have a Rashomon of his backstory as to when he turned and possibly why. Going on, which is definitely interesting. So those are kind of the 3 stories I saw, and I really liked Rey. I loved Luke Skywalker. So my scale, Patrick, I'd probably do a good minus, and it's so much of Mark Hamill and Luke, like that.
Oh, Mark Hamill acted the hell out of this movie.
Yeah. I saw, he deserves a nod, like best supporting. I mean, that was just, it was so amazing. To your point about like nostalgia, there's when he comes back, we'll do spoilers, whatever, but he shows up to the Resistance to save the day, and he interacts with all of them briefly, and does like a wink at C-3PO. Just, it was so perfect. Like, if you're just gonna bottle and sell nostalgia, the way he did in that scene was amazing. So I really like those, but I hated the rebellion, Finn, Poe, Leia, what's Lena Dunham? I forget her real name in that movie. I hated.
That was not Lena Dunham.
You mean Laura Dern?
Similar. Wow.
Almost
not similar at all.
Almost as bad as Cowie Leonard or whatever, right, EJ? So anyway, apologies. I hated that storyline so much in regards to the other thing. That's kind of the imbalance of the movie to me. And I'm curious. I'll throw to EJ first. Like, did you have any thoughts on the balancing of the movie? Am I wrong? Was that plot line? Is there anything redeeming about that plot? Wow.
I guess what I'd say is that, remember how there was a new, even bigger, worse Death Star out of nowhere in the previous one because it had to be a shot-for-shot remake palate cleanser to get us back on board with Star Wars? All right. And then, lots of planets were destroyed, and also apparently there's the First Order, which is just the Empire with the serial numbers filed off and all of that. And we've all just sort of collectively agreed as a society to accept that as the price we pay to get more Star Wars that we will like. That's basically how I feel about sort of the like plot situation going on in that plot line. And once I'm willing to accept that, then I'm more interested in the character and thematic work that's being done in there. And I think there's some important stuff going on. Because, like I said, what I love about this movie is the degree to which it is continually interrogating the assumptions from past films and explicitly choosing not to recapitulate them. And what that plot line is doing is saying that, you know, the brash, lone, charismatic person who thinks he knows better than everyone else rushing in to save the day is more likely than not going to mess everything up and get tons of people killed, which is exactly what happens more than once.
That I actually do love that, because this is a weird movie to compare it to, and I'll try and give you a nice segue in, Patrick, but The Internship, or I think it was called something like that. It had the Wedding Crashers guys, and they were interns at Google, and it was the dumbest thing ever, and it's the classic, these people who are completely equipped to do anything based on their bravado and charm and whatever, manage to somehow help and save the day, when it's really more of the Billy Madison. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. If they were on any engineering team any of us have ever seen, and they acted the way they did in that movie, which again most people haven't seen, I think it's called The Internship, I could be wrong, we would just say, get the hell out of the room. But of course they make a movie, and what made me better is that was made with the assistance of Google. So we have really propped up this charismatic, roguish lead, which, you know, basic Han Solo kind of started, right? And it is actually nice. I'll give you that. Like that's the plot line. If nothing else, it was nice to see that character get swatted on the nose a few times. My only annoyance was it wasn't a little harder, because he gets demoted, and the second time Leia shoots him, and I really wish they were just like, go away.
Why does the entire resistance fit on the Millennium Falcon at the end? Because his plan ended up alerting them to the realities of those cloaked transports. And so, like, 2/3 of everyone who's left alive died because of his mutiny.
Yeah. But that's my only problem, is at the end of the movie, when he's on the ship with them, I'm like, why are you still here? Like, I love the actor, Oscar Isaac's, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Fantastic. You know, I think we discussed this last night. I think he's Guatemalan and Cuban. I think that's his background. I could be mistaken. If you want to
comparing the way he plays Poe Dameron to his role in Ex Machina, it's like he's got tremendous range, it turns out.
And by the way, a funny thing, as I mentioned, I re-listened to our last show, EJ. On that, I promised I was going to watch Ex Machina before we spoke next, and we've actually spoken before this podcast. Still haven't watched, even though it's right up my alley. But yeah. But anyway,
Oscar Isaac in Ex Machina is now my hair guru. So
okay. But anyway, just, you know, I love seeing him on screen for many reasons. Like, I love the movie Coco for, you know, had all the feels for similar reasons. But at the end of the movie, I was like, this character should not be allowed on that ship. He has ruined everything.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think there's much argument that that's the kind of point he was trying to pound home. But at the end, the character, I think, is too popular to just kill him off. I mean, he's literally competing with Han Solo in terms of popularity in the franchise. For me, I thought the characterization of Finn was kind of the weakest in this movie. I really liked Finn's character in The Force Awakens, and I just didn't think he really went very many places.
No, they didn't do much in this one.
I actually really liked
Rose?
Yes, sorry, thank you. I liked Rose, but I thought the plot that Rose was stuck in was worthless, kind of.
I completely disagree.
Oh, really?
I think that the actual scenes, like, so we're talking about the Canto Bight section, basically, right?
I am talking about the Canto Bight section.
Which I think probably has the movie's weakest pacing.
Maybe it's not what I hate.
It's just enjoyable to watch in that regard. But it's also I think literally the first time in a Star Wars movie, with the potential exception of the prequels, which are their own weird beasts, where there is reference to things in the galaxy, like kinds of injustice, that are worth taking seriously, that aren't like this strict binarism of light side, dark side, resistance, empire.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Like it is, it is such a sort of philosophically profound expansion of like the heroic remit of the Star Wars project that I forgive it its poor pacing.
Yeah, well, it's poor pacing, and it's also, I think it was pretty ham-fisted in how it delivered that message. It was very, it was very preachy and very, like the scene where she tells him to look deeper and he like uses binocular and randomly there just so happens to be a slave driver with a whip there, because of course there is. It's just kind of, it was very ham-fisted in its delivery of that mechanism. It's the kind of thing that, this is totally unfair because there isn't time for it, but this is the kind of thing you could tell over the course of like an hour. And get that point home, but there isn't time for it in the pacing of this movie to do that. And there isn't time to do an extra solo Star Wars movie that's all about Rose to get that point in either. I liked Rose's character. I thought Finn was. I don't know who decided that all of a sudden they were just going to push the pause button on whatever character development Finn is doing, because that's what essentially happened in this movie. I thought like all of the characters aside from Finn went through some kind of transformation, were different at the end of the movie. And yes, I agree with Dre. It's weird that, Poe was allowed to go through that kind of transformation and yet not really suffer any consequences of it. I mean, in most armies, when you get almost everyone killed, at the very, very least, you're court-martialed and like thrown in prison or something. But here he's just kind of gets to get demoted by one rank.
Dre, can I jump in on Finn real fast?
Okay,
yeah,
so
I'm here.
Many hats, Brian Foster is on the show. You can find him on Twitter as Boxscore Brian. Hey, Brian.
So I want to say that I agree pretty much with everything that's been said, especially on Poe. And I've kind of seen Finn the same way as Poe. Like they're pretty much the very similar character. They're both like another Han Solo. They just do roguish stuff and crack jokes, and it's just kind of like a way to have two Han Solos out there on screen. Like that doesn't solve any of the character stuff you guys are talking about, but that's kind of like how I feel it turns out functionally for those characters.
So yeah, my problem with Poe is that it seems like, so Abrams originally casted Poe as a character who was going to die in that first scene, but then he loved Oscar Isaac so much and thought he was so great on screen that he kept a role around from. And to me, all that really says is, well, maybe you should have cast Oscar Isaac in your reboot Han Solo role. I mean, I don't feel like there's room for two characters of that sort, and I feel like so I love both actors and I wouldn't want to kick either one of them out of the universe, so to speak, but then maybe you should have just gone in a different direction with the characterization of Finn then afterwards, because I feel like there's a lot of places that the Finn character could go that aren't necessarily in that Han Solo mode.
Right. I was actually going to say that I just don't agree that Finn is another Han Solo. I think if we're drawing comparisons to the original trilogy, I think that if there's a character that Finn is closest to being, it's some weird combination of like take the average of R2-D2 and Chewbacca, basically, in terms of the role in the story. Like, they're there and they occasionally solve problems, but like they're not the charismatic everyone look at me, and they're not a chosen one hero. They're sort of effective people who are moving, but more time in the spotlight. Like Finn got a lot more development in The Force Awakens, whereas Poe basically was sort of a flat character in The Force Awakens. He just was who he was. Poe got a lot of development in The Last Jedi, and Finn didn't. I would say over the course of the two new movies we've seen, they've been handled approximately equally, just, in a bipartite manner.
Yeah.
So I was going to it's interesting because what you just said, I don't know if it was intentional, and so I don't know if I'm willing to give it the credit, but one positive of I don't even remember the Casino Royale planet that you did, EJ, you know much better than me.
Canto Bite.
That side story is in that, right? They meet Benicio del Toro in the cell. He's not who they're looking for. I thought the obvious was going to be that you discovered he'd gambled away his little. They were supposed to find a locksmith essentially through lots of stuff. I'm going to break my next point because I'm going to talk about how this doesn't make sense, and then my next point on the script is literally Star Wars doesn't make sense. But they think they're going to find this person. They don't find him. They find someone else who's supposed to help them hack the Empire, and then lo and behold, he isn't really able to. Their plan fails, and he betrays them. And I was upset by just that kind of that point A to B, like, oh, they're just trusting this random person. Oh, this is going on. They've got a 6-hour time. Are you effing crazy? But admittedly, that entire plot could basically be summed up as this is why these things don't normally work.
Yeah.
And so admittedly, thinking about it now, it's like, oh yeah, this is just another classic. The rogue runs in, flies by my seat of my pants. I'm going to wing the plan. A Mal Reynolds on a Serenity and Firefly. Yeah, this doesn't work. The end result of this is you lose 90% of your fleet over the course of 2 battles, and you need a Jedi wizard to save your butt to have any hope of even continuing.
2 Jedi wizards.
2 Jedi wizards.
But so my next point I actually wanted to say, I said this is a pet peeve, and I say this admittedly right after explaining a plot point that didn't make sense, is stop pretending Star Wars makes sense. So a huge friend, obviously Arturo on Twitter as American Numbers, was just going through how much of this movie doesn't make sense. For instance, their chase, the chase through space. They're the Empire. Why the hell can't they radio for someone else to light speed in front, et cetera, et cetera? And I will actually give you that. A lot of this story doesn't make sense on many fronts. The light speed into another ship, if that technology has existed throughout all of Star Wars, what the hell is battle technology or whatever? But admittedly, what I just wanted to say is, if we are talking Star Wars as a series, it has never made sense. And as a comparison, in Empire Strikes Back, you have this big fleet, including Darth Vader, chasing one ship through space. Why do they need to chase them through space? Where they even get so desperate as to call in bounty hunters to help, and then have to rely on working out a deal with the friend of the person. You've got a fleet chasing one ship without hyperdrive, and they go through this many links. So it's like, it's not as if the Star Wars lore doesn't have similar stories that make little to no sense, but I at least wanted to get that out there. And on the script, what I like, EJ, as you wrote, EJ concurs. And then Patrick, I'll let you, if you have anything there. I know it's not.
Yeah, I think I made this point during the pregame show, but Star Wars is fantasy, not science fiction. And I agree that even in fantasy, you can have universes with laws that should be consistent with one another. But to me, the whole light speed thing, the thing that's a little bit annoying about that is it's like somebody decided to insert some hard sci-fi elements into this fake sci-fi fantasy universe, because it literally doesn't make sense. Obviously a human couldn't possibly plot a trajectory like that at light speed, which means she plotted the direct trajectory before she hit go, which means why the fuck did she have to be on the ship to hit go? But it basically, the real problem with it is it creates this I don't know, do we call it a Deus Ex Machina, where like, why wouldn't every battle be solved that way? And it's not glaring as the laws of physics don't make sense kind of way. It's glaring in a, like, we all know, it jars us out of like our belief of everything. We all know that every battle would have been resolved exactly this way if that were a thing that people could do.
And yet, I loved it.
Well, we all loved it because it's clearly, from a visual effects perspective and from a cinematic experience perspective, it's the best scene in the movie, right? I don't know how it was with you guys, but I was in a packed theater where in that movie, in that scene where there is no sound, where it is silent, the fucking theater was silent too. Like you couldn't hear anybody eating popcorn or anything. The whole movie was silent. And after like 3 seconds, one guy was like, wow. And we could all hear him whisper that because that's how quiet we all were, because it was just an amazing visual cinematic moment. I'm just not entirely convinced that we needed this plot device.
That you see after that amazing visual cinematic moment, the next thing you see is Leia and Poe looking out the window, watching it happen. It is like it's these like, you know, like Stanislavski, an actor prepares. Like there's this one chapter where he's talking. There's this one actor, and it's like, you know, what's wrong with my performance? It's like, well, you're guilty of the exploitation of art. You're not acting to make art happen. You're acting to bring like approval onto yourself, and like it's this demonstration to Poe Dameron that, you know, at the core of all of the heroics he's been trying to do has been ego, and that, you know, heroics without ego is something as spectacular as that.
I just wonder if they couldn't have found a plot device that would have, you know, brought to life the like. So, could we not have found some like secret new tech or something? I mean, it doesn't. If we're gonna do something incredibly implausible, then why don't we do that instead of finding a code breaker on a casino planet, and then come back to the ship and then all in 6 hours? Like it just feels like the actual plot device used. It's like he sacrificed a queen in a game of chess, right? To do this, and I'm not sure that sacrifice was worth the result. Does that make any sense? Is that a terrible metaphor? Everyone's obsessing, I guess, about this, like the whole, you know, using light speed to destroy a fleet thing. And I think he could have found some other way to drive that plot point home.
Well, I think it was supposed to be the Admiral sacrifice. I think it is an interesting where I think just both thematically and pacing kind of worked. I was fine to be out of that stupid story, so that plot point, so I was fine with it. I'm not going to give much justification to it. I agree with actually Brian on the script. I'm just here for the explosions. I liked the moment, and it was effective enough of a moment to make me forget the movie while I was in it. I do think that's a very, I didn't put this anywhere on the script, but it is a very big difference. And Patrick, you might be able to speak to it, about watching a movie now versus back in the day, because I remember not Empire Strikes Back, but I think the first major big movies for me would have been Back to the Future, where you don't get to see it immediately, especially if you're a kid. So you have to wait to see it, and everything isn't ruined for you. And I'm not talking like the plot, but I mean, you know, by the time Star Wars is coming out, if you wanted to find information about Star Wars, this picture of so and so on set is this. Here's a picture of Mark Hamill doing blah. So and so says this. You know, there was an interview with Mark Hamill saying he hated his character on the. To be clear, that entire thing was taken out of context, where he was saying on the first pass through of the script he hated his character initially and then was talked into it. Mm-hmm. So that again, the internet turned that weird. So there's that, and then of course, as soon as you're done, you hop on Twitter, you find spoilers, or you listen to an hour and a half of Kevin Smith talk about it. Whereas back in the day, that kind of introspection didn't exist, which I feel does change some of the movie-going experience. Because, yeah, I probably in an old movie would not have thought that hard about that scene, but because of how the movie is, I've definitely thought about the light speed. You know, that was like one of the first things my brother and I talked about over text.
I'm going to disagree with you entirely. So it didn't happen over the internet, but this stuff totally happened back in the day. Like I remember, so I waited in line to see Empire Strikes Back. That's how old I am. And I remember while I was standing in line, some asshole gave the spoiler that Vader was Luke's father to all the people in line. And we were all just like, what? What are you talking about? And at the time, I just kind of cast that off as ridiculousness because that couldn't possibly be true. And then, of course, in the middle of the movie, I see that happen, and I'm like, "Wow, that guy just totally gave away the spoiler." And I think, if anything, No, I mean, we were exactly as passionate about stuff like this. We would sit around for hours and talk about like plot inconsistencies or things that one person hated or didn't like. Movies got dissected ad nauseum. They just didn't get dissected on the internet with as wide of an audience, I guess. And in fact, that might be one of the things I sort of miss of those days is the sitting around with friends afterwards and talking about the movie, you know, like stealing time in study hall at high school to talk about the movie you saw last night and stuff like that. I mean, but I remember the big thing that everybody hated about The Empire Strikes Back in the day was the whole plot point about like the ridiculousness of them jumping out of hyperspace too early or too soon, or I forget which one it is, and then so they have to land on a planet like a mile away from the rebel base or whatever it is. It's like, okay, if you could somehow get fucking Imperial walkers on the planet, I'm pretty sure you'd be able to just bombard that station from space, right?
It had a shield generator, sir. It had a shield generator. That's the only weakness was.
Was I the only one who saw another recent movie where there was like a planet that ate stars and spat them across the galaxy? Like,
are you referring to the living planet in Guardians of the Galaxy?
No, I'm talking about The Force Awakens.
Oh yeah, well, yeah. Sure.
There's.
Well, I'm just saying, like these,
the worries that take up. But why, but this moment, like, why didn't they do that for everything? My eyes start because it's a Star Wars.
Yeah, and
the only point I'm making is that these conversations existed back then. Like,
believe
believe me, when Return of the Jedi came out, people absolutely talked about the fact that I can't believe they blew up another Star Wars, and I can't believe the Death Star had the same fault in it, kind of thing, right?
Well, I made this. I think I did make this tweet where I said, actually, ironically, one of the most believable things about the Star Wars movies may be that you have this big bureaucratic, government, evil empire, whatever you want to call it, that makes just really dumb decisions. Because I think that's one of these big myths. As an example, just to date us. While this is going on, I don't remember his name, which is probably a good thing, even though it's been everywhere. There was a Google employee who released a manifesto about how women are worse than men. That is the correct response, EJ. But I want to hammer this home. He lied on his resume about being a international master of chess, which is a huge thing. He lied about having a doctorate or being in the doctorate program. I forget which. Additionally, the manifesto, the revelation after the fact is that it had been up in Google for quite a while and had to be kind of like publicly shamed for them to do anything. So you have this big company that prides itself on search and intelligence and smart. And they were like, oh, yeah, you can fake your resume and leave hate speech on our internal internet, and we're not even going to notice. So again, to like the when we're talking like the Empire doing stupid things, like why on earth didn't they do this? It's like, yeah, you know what? Sometimes the people in charge make dumb decisions.
That topic feels pretty relevant right now.
And then I don't have subtle landing into this, but I did want to, because we got like 5 minutes of you, Patrick. I did want to definitely give Mark Hamill his due. Amazing performance. I think he deserves, in no universe would he get it, but best supporting actor, he absolutely at least deserves a nod. He was so fantastic in this. I mean, I think Mark Hamill was kind of Wesley Crushered on the original series, where he was just, the flat character, wasn't as interesting as Han, wasn't as cool as Carrie Fisher. He showed off his acting chops and did amazing. And, this was a role of a lifetime. I'm so happy I saw it. As I mentioned, a lot of my love of the movie was it. And then all I wanted to get in my like 2 cents, my two druthers is, if you're looking at Luke as like the Ben character, his sacrifice made a lot of sense and was awesome. And a topic for another day, I'm not going to spend too much time. You guys already heard it pre-show, so maybe the rest of you will hear later, is Ben Kenobi's sacrifice in the original Star Wars was utterly meaningless. So, that's what I got there.
Yeah. So first of all, I'll extend my time a little bit to talk about Mark Hamill because it's worth it. I thought that all of the Luke scenes were gold. I loved all of them. And we talk a little bit about the humor in the movie. I think for some fans, the humor was a bit too much, and they felt like Star Wars needs to be serious. That's something I totally disagree with. I don't think Star Wars needs to be serious at all. I do think there were some.
It's never been serious.
Exactly, I agree. I agree entirely. If you look at the original series, there's tons of great humor in the original series. The thing is, I thought some of the humor felt a little bit anachronistic, if that even makes sense in a thing that happens in a galaxy far away and long ago. And some of the humor brought me sort of out of my suspension of disbelief, in the sense that I could sort of almost sense the writer writing the joke that I was seeing. But all of Mark Hamill's humor was amazing and felt really organic and felt like absolutely like something that would just come from Luke. And particularly the scene where he says, "Reach out," and she physically reaches out and he's rolling his eyes. And that scene is so amazing. And it absolutely is totally something that felt like Luke to me.
Yeah. I'll let you get another word in, EJ.
Oh, I agree. I think that the handling of Luke Skywalker in this film was perfect. I have no criticisms of it. I have no criticisms of the acting. I have no criticisms of the writing. And I also think that, one of the things we had in our script was a movie reviewer, Bob Chipman, who does YouTube reviews. He did a spoilery discussion of Last Jedi, and now he's put up one of what's going to be a 2-part project just looking at Luke Skywalker in it. And a lot of the complaints about it have been...
That's awesome.
A lot of the complaints about it have been, probably, people... I can only imagine, because it doesn't come from the movies. The notion, extended universe stuff, Star Wars video games, well, obviously, Luke Skywalker, post Return of the Jedi, goes on to be space Clint Eastwood for the rest of time. And Bob Chipman makes the point that, actually, all of the Luke Skywalker we've seen up to this point has been sort of the first half of the King Arthur story.
Yeah.
The young boy discovers a wizard, learns that he's, the heir to an aristocratic lineage, gets a magic sword, becomes king, and for a while things are good, but infighting from within his own family brings him down, and he recedes into, we've now, as of The Last Jedi, gotten the other half of the King Arthur arc, with this sort of self-loathing Luke Skywalker who has managed to recapitulate the sins of Jedi Masters past, and eventually. And what I love about that is, at no point in the movie does he ever try to excuse himself. From the beginning to his ending act of heroism, his stance is, this is a problem that I have to step in, that I've been convinced I actually have to step in and clean up, because I messed things up. This is my fault. And there's no excusing it. I just failed. And I think that's great. I think that, as part of the movie's broader thesis of getting away from, special lineage, the special people heroes will come save us, the message of that last scene with, the little kids talking about, the great Luke Skywalker, and then one of them just using the Force to pick up his slave broom, that it's not going to be the one special Force lineage that comes and saves the galaxy anymore, but that time is over. I thought it was perfect. I thought every aspect of it was done correctly.
And can I just say, I have no idea if they're going to go in this direction, but I love the idea of the next Star Wars being 20 years forward in that films, in that universe, and and there's literally a fucking army of Jedi ninjas that have all just kind of, and they don't win because Rey is the new wizard. They win because there's a fucking army of Jedi ninjas. Right? I think that would be amazing, and I think you could do it. Kind of the parallel, I guess, would be, I don't know if either of you watched Buffy, but in Buffy season 7, where she's like, fuck this chosen one shit, let's just make 1,000 slayers, right? Or 1,000,000 slayers, or how many slayers there that she made by whatever the magic thing they did to break the whole chosen one idea. It would be kind of awesome if the Star Wars went in that direction, right?
Yeah, and I was going to say one thing that makes me sad, because we'll see how much longer we get you, Patrick. But like, we haven't talked Kylo Ren at all, and I also liked his arc a lot in the sense that, and I think this is from an email you said pre-show, Patrick, but like, there isn't this redemption quality, and it's okay to have a bad person that kind of wavers a little, maybe, or it's played very well, because in the movie, he has a psychic link via the evil emperor, whose name I keep confusing the M and N in my head. Opens up a psychic link, and his plan is basically to manipulate Rey into basically giving up Luke Skywalker so that he can be done with the Jedi, hence the name of the movie. And that Kylo Ren, Ben Solo basically notices this and then takes advantage of that to kill the Emperor and then put himself in charge. So it's questionable. What was he ever wavering, or was he always manipulating Rey and waiting for the right moment? That's very Sithish, right? Even Darth Vader in The Empire Strikes Back had as soon as he found Luke saying, "Hey, team up with me. I'm not good because I've discovered you're my son. But now that you're here, we can fight, we can take over, we can run stuff." So it's very interesting, and we don't necessarily know how it was played. So I really liked his story. I love the acting. That was very good. I'll let you get the capper on that if you want that to be the last thing on the show.
Yeah, I will say that I absolutely have always hated Vader's redemption arc. The idea that somebody who killed literally slaughters a temple full of children in his 20s, or however old Anakin Skywalker is in the third prequel. Later, we all forgive him because he saved his own son from the Emperor. I've always hated that redemption arc. I like the idea that good and evil isn't binary, but even more than that, I like the idea that an evil character might do something good for reasons that have nothing to do with him being a good person, but because he might have some. In Kylo's case, it appears from what we've seen that he might do some good things because he's in love with Rey. He might do good things for her because he's in love with her, but none of that would make him a good person. That what he did to the Emperor is probably more out of self-interest. And he might have good reasons for loathing I guess he was the supreme leader, not the Emperor. He could have good reasons for loathing that person because of whatever terrible training probably happened to turn him to the dark side. But that doesn't necessarily make him a good person by killing that person. So I like that it wasn't a redemption arc in that sense. It was a series of events that made him a more interesting character, but it wasn't he's one of the good guys now type of turn of events, which is always the thing I hated about Vader. Like, they could have totally done a thing of, Vader is now more interesting than just random guy in a black suit who's evil. But instead they just went the full blown, no, he's standing next to Obi-Wan Kenobi at the fireside as a Force ghost. That always just irritated me about that arc, and I'm glad they didn't repeat that so far.
Anything to add, EJ?
Yeah, I agree. Basically, every instance where the movie fainted in the direction of recapitulating narrative beats from the original trilogy and then explicitly veered away from it, I approved of. Because I don't know if I said this after we started recording or not, but this movie, by doing that, by saying, we can have alternative narrative modes while still engaging in this world and this tone, made an argument for there to be a reason to make more Star Wars movies, which was an argument I was making. I mean, the Force Awakens didn't do that. The Force Awakens, made an argument that reshooting the original Star Wars would make $2 billion, and it made that argument very effectively. But as for why there need to be new Star Wars movies, or why there should be new Star Wars movies, I think that the first thing to really, artistically, interestingly give an answer to that why make new Star Wars movies question is all of the countervening of expectation that The Last Jedi did.
And actually,
the one counterpoint I'd make to that is that I think the fact that The Force Awakens had, a female lead and a black lead were both like, even if they're just telling the same story, the fact that they're doing it with a more diverse cast was a thing that probably in and of itself was worth it. Made it worthwhile. I've talked to so many people who were like, I was so happy to like see myself on the screen.
I wrote that in my review of it at the time, that like by far the most important thing about that movie is that it's about to be like the highest grossing movie ever, and it stars a woman and a black guy.
Mm.
And I'll actually shout out our old podcast. We did. This has been a much more interesting turn of events, because in the last one, you and EJ disagreed a lot more. So there weren't.
I like The Force Awakens more than him. There's no question.
That's what I was going to say. Hey EJ, what do you have to say on this point after Patrick talks? There are a few times I threw out like a red card. Was like, hey, break it up. We got the next point to get to. This one's been much more agreeable. But of the things you agreed on Force Awakens, that was it. And so yeah, definitely.
Dre, I can jump in and disagree here a little bit.
Uh-oh.
So I agree with everything you guys said about Kylo Ren. I love the acting. I love what happened to him. I think, though, that odds are they will redeem him before the end of the third movie. I think they'll do it.
I am really, after having seen what Rian Johnson did, I am not thrilled that we're going back to J.J. Abrams now.
I will agree with that as well.
Yeah. It's not that J.J. Abrams is a bad director. It's just, he's not an auteur. He's not a director with vision. Yeah. And I don't know if Colin Trevorrow would have been one back when he was tapped to be the director of the third movie.
Right.
But I think it remains to be seen whether or not J.J. Abrams has the chops to like carry forward the momentum that Rian Johnson has given him in The Last Jedi, or if he sort of backslides into his usual habit of sort of fan service remakes of original whenever he takes on franchise movies.
Well, there's not only that, but he's a director that tends to sort of go back to the same well over and over and again, the same sort of tricks in his bag. And I do love the things he did in The Force Awakens in a sense of cleaning the palette, resetting the universe, whatever you want to call it. And I've always thought J.J. Abrams is very strong in terms of character and dialogue, but that's not what the third movie probably needs, because these characters are pretty well established. So we don't need to establish them. We need to bring them along further. And I'm not certain I trust Abrams to do that.
Yeah. And also, with respect to the third movie was originally going to be the General Leia movie. The first one was going to be the Han Solo movie, and the second one was going to be the Luke Skywalker movie. And the third one was going to be the General Leia movie, and she was going to be the person from the original who is most involved in the story. And now we don't get to have that because of the death of Carrie Fisher.
Obvious answer: bring back Lando to be the general again. That's
Love it.
I do think they should bring back Lando either way. I mean, come on.
Yeah, but this is my reason why I think that it would be great if there was a time skip. Is so you don't have digital Leia.
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, interestingly enough, I haven't seen Rogue One yet, which, I'm one of like 10 people in the world, I guess, because the Disney movies, the Star Wars are now 3 of their top 4 grossing movies of all time, which tells you something. But yeah, the Uncanny Valley Princess Leia from that was not good. So
it wasn't just her. I actually thought that the Tarkin had an Uncanny Valley effect too. A lot of people praised it and thought it looked so realistic. And I did at first, like the first 15 seconds, I was like, holy shit, I thought Peter Cushing was dead. But then as soon as you see him like walk, he has that sort of weird gait to him that a lot of CGI characters in video games have, and some other things. The Uncanny Valley definitely appeared there as well.
Guys, I'll say that I have read they will not be digitizing Carrie Fisher at all for the third movie.
Yeah, I read that as well, which is why I think a time jump is probably the way to go.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, it's
the other loss is not only that we don't get, like finally at least we got to see her use the Force and do things like that in this movie. But not only do we not get the let Carrie Fisher be the star of the show for once, we also don't get her work on the script. She was a script doctor in Hollywood for like a decade, and Rainn Johnson has talked in interviews about how he would go to her house and be sitting there furiously typing as she dictated script revisions to him. I don't know. I don't think she actually has a writing credit on The Last Jedi, but she did punch up on that script.
Yeah, that would make a lot of sense. And that was Brian's. I was gonna say, I think we could easily go longer, but we're past what Patrick claimed was his cutoff time.
Yeah, I'll give myself 2 more minutes because I want to ask a question. EJ, if you could pick any director out there to direct the third one, who would it be?
Oh, interesting. Go to your second thing while I think about the answer to that.
Actually, that was my only thing.
Oh, I thought you said change.
2 minutes.
Okay, we'll talk about whatever we're going to say in the second minute while I figure out the first.
Well, okay.
Shout out. So if you have any shout outs, Patrick, I'll let you do that. And then that way you're free and clear to go.
I have no shout outs. I would like to use this time to find out who you would pick.
All right. So I'll start my shout out. And then so the first shout out, obviously, Brian already put, we discussed, which I'm happy about, was Carrie Fisher. The shout out I'll give is if you haven't seen this before, Cracked Studios, which is now defunct, kind of a shame thing, very ESPN-ish. Cracked fired 90% of their writing staff. There's no video anymore. So one of my favorite sites that had some of the most introspective Star Wars content is destroyed now. But back in the day, they released a 3-part web series called Jedi Academy, which I think is a love letter to Star Wars that is a parody and spoof. So that's going to be my shout out. If you're looking for kind of some introspective Star Wars stuff to see on the internet, if you're jonesing for more, you can't wait a year for the Han Solo movie or 2 years for the next. You should check that out. EJ, have you figured out?
Okay. I actually think I do have my answer. If I had my druthers, I would have the third movie written and directed by Alex Garland.
Ooh, that is a really interesting choice.
I want Star Wars that I haven't seen before. So he's proven that he can nail the tonality of franchise projects by his script for Dread, which was twice as smart as it had any right to be in every respect. And if you haven't seen Dread and are amenable to really sort of pretty cinematic gore and violence, you should see Dread. And then he wrote and directed Ex Machina, and now he's the writer and director for the adaptation of the first of the Area X trilogy by Jeff Vandermeer. And the previews for that look amazing. I'd love to see what he could do with the Star Wars movie. I also have a particular desire for these new Star Wars movies, these new main sequence Star Wars movies, to be broken up into trilogies. If the next one is just the next one, I'm fine with that.
I actually kind of like the trilogy idea, but I think I agree with you. As long as it's sort of it remains a saga in nature, and that it's continuing a very long story arc. It's not just, I don't want episode of the week Star Wars kind of feeling.
Well, but Star Wars is always drawn heavily on old serialized.
Right, but the whole point of serialized is that it's not. So if you watch a show like CSI or something, you don't have to watch episode 1 to know what's going on in episode 2, right? That's the feeling I'm trying to avoid here. I want some progression from.
I'm not suggesting Star Wars become Death Star of the week. I'm just saying that I would be fine if the next movie did not bring a close to Kylo and Rey and everyone's character arc and Tyano and that could continue until sort of it found its natural ending. I don't demand that it all be wrapped up in the next movie.
All right. Well, I'm gonna, and this isn't really a shout out, but it's a wrap up to my trilogy. So I've been talking Pokemon Go the last couple of shows. I did actually get an exclusive raid pass this last week, so I'm excited about that. Although they still, if you're a Pokemon Go fan, they still need to fix that system. But yeah, so I'll let you know if I get Mewtwo next week in the 4th movie in my trilogy. Again, this has been the Boxscore Geek Show. Special guest EJ Fischer. You can find at Eugene Fischer with a C .com and see him avoiding social media, which we should all do. I wish I could be the same. Anything else you want to plug, EJ, before I outro the rest of us?
Anything else I want to plug? I mean, it's almost irrelevant at this point because she was just a finalist for the National Book Award. But one of my best friends, Carmen Marie Machado, had her first short story collection come out last October, and it's one of the best short story collections I think that's been published in years. And, well, the National Book Award agreed with me. So,
nice.
Yeah, go out, read that. It's excellent.
Yeah, if you could send that to Brian just so I don't forget to put it on the script, I'd appreciate it.
Sure.
Then Patrick, you didn't have any shout-outs, so co-host Patrick Minton, a.k.a. NBA Geek. Producer, voice of God, Brian, still have to give you that tag. We don't have a third nickname, but the commenter did mention like Taskmaster, so I might
love that. Great Marvel character, Taskmaster, by the way.
I didn't know that. Brian Foster, you can find on Twitter as Boxscore Brian. I've been your host, Dre Alvarez, a.k.a. Nerd Numbers, Boxscore Geek Show. You can find us at boxscoregeeks.com, iTunes, and Stitcher, the Boxscore Geek Show. I don't actually know if this one counts, Brian. Usually I think you do Star Wars as their own, so we'll see what we do that. Yeah, we go live every week, Tuesday or Wednesday, twitch.tv/Nerd Numbers, 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and you can catch the recaps on channel Nerd Numbers on YouTube. I think I got everything in there despite a few detractions. That's been our show, and we'll talk to you next time.